Hey, you guys, this is Josh.
And Carolyn.
With Homesteading Family, and welcome to this week's episode of the Pantry Chat Food for Thought.
We're not in the pantry today. We are out in the garden, and today we're going to be talking about
strategies for extending your harvest for a continual harvest in the garden throughout the growing season.
There you have it.
Strategies for a continual harvest in the garden. That's what we're going to get to here in just a few minutes.
Yeah.
But we got to get to a little chit chat first.
Yeah, we often do some chit chat before we start on the main topic. If you want to skip ahead and get right to the main topic, check the description. We have it all time stamped for you so you know right where to skip ahead to.
That's right. But in the meantime, what's going on with you?
Wow, it is just like full steam around here right now.
Look at this. We're outside.
It's sunny. Oh my goodness, it's sunny. I feel like we haven't had sun in weeks straight.
It's been a while, but I'm real thankful for the rain right now. Yeah. We've got a lot of projects going on, and last May it was very hot and dry this time of year. Mm-hmm. And so, the rain's good, but it's nice to be out now.
Yeah, it is. But we've been out planting in the garden.
Yep.
That's been the main crop has been going in, the beginning of the main crop here.
That's right.
And so, of course, we have some of our spring stuff already in. We'll be talking about some of this today in the main topic, but we've been getting the main season crop in the last little bit. And that's, it's been a lot of fun because we have enough older kids who have been gardening now with us for years that it actually really went a lot faster and was a lot easier than it normally does for us.
Yeah, people are growing up and getting better versed in what they're doing.
Yes.
And went real well today with one of our main plantings.
Yeah, did.
Yeah. What else?
So,
what?
Let's see, other things.
What, your cottage garden? There's stuff going on?
There's stuff going on in the cottage. But you know what? There's two big things here on the farm right now. And one is that all the goslings hatched.
Yep, all the little baby goslings.
We've got the goose family walking around with a bunch of little goslings between them, and they're doing a great job. That's fun. And then the kids, one of the adult geese got off their nest just days before it was supposed to hatch. So the kids went and got the eggs, and we've been incubating them inside. We have one already hatched and another one looking like it's about to hatch. So we are raising a little gosling in the house, and it's a lot of fun.
Did we do a story on that?
I think we did. I think we did a story on that.
I think there should be a story on IG.
Go check out Instagram and see if you can see a story on the goslings.
Should be.
Yeah. So we're doing that, but then Tilly, the milk cow, had a calf.
Yep.
Do you know what we named the calf? We named the calf Mook.
Tilly Mook.
Tilly Mook.
Great idea.
Okay, but everything went really well with Tilly having her calf.
Yep.
And
so we're coming back into milk.
We are back into milk.
Cream and butter. Excited about that.
Yep.
It's always a great time of year.
Was the first day that we were actually able to save the milk. The first several days, the milk is very colostrum heavy, and you can drink that. It's actually a huge health boost. But you wouldn't just use it as a replacement for milk. It has different flavors, and I don't know that you would need that much colostrum. So a little bit here and there is okay. So a few days in, you start getting true milk.
Right.
And so we're just there and just getting excited to be able to start making yogurts and cheeses and butter.
Oh,
we like butter in here.
Yeah, we do.
So
like a little bread with my butter.
So that's kind of a big thing. But this was a really successful last year because it was the first year that I had to buy pretty much no butter from the store. We put up enough butter last year.
And you staged it out real well and made it last.
We made it last, yeah. And so we had butter all through the winter while Tilly was dry, and just using the last of that.
So what, last year we produced 95% of our own butter?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Wow.
I would say 95% of our own
that's
butter.
Definitely. We've been dairying for 8-9 years.
Yeah.
And that's definitely the best we've done.
On the butter. And we have our weekly pizza night, and so we have mozzarella cheese for that. And we have not had to buy mozzarella cheese all year.
Nice.
We made it right through. We used the last of it last weekend.
Yep.
And so we'll have enough milk to make it for this coming weekend.
Yep.
And so we did not lose out on any homemade mozzarella cheese. So
you know, you
really
guys, not all of you have the land for it, but a dairy cow is one of the most profitable enterprises on the homestead, on a family farm.
Yeah.
Next to the garden, as far as the input that goes in and the return, if you will use your milk, make butter, make cheese, make yogurt. You can return the whey and buttermilk. Well, there's a few things you can also do in the house with that. You can use that to feed chickens and pigs. It's a really great way to go. And if you don't have land for a dairy cow, look at supporting a local small dairyman, because you can do all that buying it. And you know, the cost is a little higher because you're paying somebody else, but you can still buy that milk raw and do all of those things. Make your own butter, make all these products, and very, very good value, because all of those products get marked up heavily in the store.
Yeah.
And so when you do that yourself, it's a huge, huge value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So what about you? What have you been up to?
Wow.
I mean, some of those things you've been up to too.
Yeah, well, obviously we've been in the garden and right behind us here and getting the main crop going. So that's exciting. We're doing a lot more root crops this year.
Yes.
From more onions, more potatoes, more carrots, beets, parsnips, and we're in a good climate for that, for root crop storage.
Yep.
Carolyn also wants to get away from canning as much if we can.
Yeah.
And have a little better storing option. So that's going to push projects this fall to get some storage, because we really don't have sizable storage. Yeah, so we're going to
need one now.
Yep. So I'll be hearing about that all summer.
I figured as long as the veggies were growing in there,
put them in the garden, and it'll have to happen.
That's going to move to the top of your to-do list one way or another.
Right. Yep. So we've been doing that. We just reseeded 3 acres of pasture.
Right.
Which is really exciting. We had a dozer here doing some final work for Mom and Dad's project. A lot of you know that Carolyn's mom and dad moved onto the property with us. We built them a house and had some work here, and the pasture we bought it was in bad shape.
Yeah.
So we ran a dozer over it, cleaned it up, dissed it, and reseeded it. And that's just starting to sprout. That's why I'm really thankful for all the rain because 3 acres isn't huge, but it's too much to put a sprinkler out on.
Yeah.
And so we're getting, everything's coming up. And then, I don't know if you guys are getting any of the background noise, but there's some major machinery back here. We have a 1 acre pond, and before we start on an orchard project, we wanted to get it dug out because we want to do some aquaculture and have our own fish production on the property. And so they're digging that out right now. And
well, it's filled in with silt over the years.
Yeah, it's been silted over.
And so now it's very shallow.
Right.
And it's time to get it cleaned up.
And it's one of those things that we're going to be able to do it once probably in our lifetime, because that area, our access to it's going to get all planted up with an orchard and pasture. So they're digging that out. And what we didn't realize we were going to get out of it is, I mean, we knew it, but we didn't realize to what extent the topsoil that we're getting.
Yes.
That's going to add 6 inches to a foot of topsoil to our future orchard, about a 1 acre orchard.
That's pretty
That
amazing.
is really exciting. So we're watching that happen, and that's it. That's all.
That's all. It's actually not all, because at the same time, I find this really interesting. We were sitting and watching the work being done with the cranes on one side, this big crane and bulldozers and machinery and everything, and then here comes Lucas, who is the young man who is here on the property logging with horses.
Yep.
And so here he comes dragging a log behind his horse, and it felt like such an interesting contrast. I have this machinery, and here comes Lucas with his horse dragging. He looks like he belongs 150 years ago.
He does,
He just looks right out of the history. And we're just really enjoying having him. We're opening up some of the forest areas on the property that's, a little too densely crowded for the health of the trees, for one, but also opening up some areas for a little more pasture.
Yeah, it's going to provide some better production for the trees in the future. We're doing some silvo pasture where we're going to thin it out a little extra and seed it and do some browsing in those areas with the sheep, particularly in some of these areas. And in other areas, we're going to open it up even more for creating some pasture.
Yeah.
So really, really exciting. And that's a whole nother story. And I think we'll cover that this summer. He's going to be here for a while. We want to get some good footage of that, maybe talk to him. So he's so quiet over there, and all the machinery's going. It's easy to forget about him. But so a lot of stuff happening right now.
It feels really busy.
Yeah, and this is more busy than a normal May, but really, really good stuff.
Very good.
And with that, though, we better move along so we can get to our topic. And of course, we always do a question. And do you want to cover that and I'll answer?
Okay, let's see. Tom Ad on the video, what to look for in a chicken tractor, says, nice design. What metal do you use for the roofing? He can't find aluminum sheeting here, and I feel like regular roofing metal would be too heavy to move, but yours looks quite light when you move it.
Okay, that was Tom?
That was Tom.
All right, good question, Tom. And if you guys haven't seen the video, I just did one, not on building a chicken tractor, but what to look for in a chicken tractor, because there's so many different styles, and they're all good for different purposes. And so I wanted to do one that just went through and covered some of the differences, why I built mine the way I did, and you might want to go check that out. And I have a metal roof on mine. It's an A-frame style. And Tom, that actually is regular corrugated metal. Aluminum would be great, and it would be lighter, but I think that would be probably very expensive. So I don't know if we have aluminum here. I didn't even look. It is a little heavier, but I've got a couple wheels on the back that hold it up just a couple inches off the ground. So it does move pretty easily on flat ground or slightly sloped ground, just the way I built it. And it was, that extra weight was okay to me. I'm not moving it very far every day. I'm not a commercial operation. And it gives us longevity. Now you could get some of the plastic, a darker plastic. Problem is that stuff gets brittle in an environment like ours, where we get pretty hot and we get freezing, and it's just going to fall apart. I wanted to build this thing, and hopefully I don't have to maintain it for 10 years. And I don't want to break it down in the wintertime, so that's why I did what I did. But you're right, it's not that hard to move, even with that metal roofing, that metal corrugated roofing. So you can do that if you want.
Great.
All righty, so getting on to the topic of the day, some strategies for extending the harvest throughout the growing season. It's our goal to extend the overall growing season as much as we can, but also to be harvesting fresh food throughout that as much as we can. A lot of times, a lot of people, and the way we started, you plant a garden once at the right time of year, and you wait till stuff starts coming in and you harvest, and a lot of things are harvested within a short window. And so you get a little bit of fresh eating, but you put everything up and you're really not getting a ton of fresh eating out of your garden with that approach. And we want to eat raw food as much as we can that's healthy, but we also want to lessen the need to preserve as much. We're always going to have to preserve quite a bit, but if we can eat freshly throughout the whole season for a longer period of time, that's a good thing. Yeah,
absolutely. So it's kind of twofold in just that way. Eating throughout the year, and then decreasing your need to preserve food in order to be able to eat. The more that you can just eat fresh, the less you have to preserve for your off times of the garden, right? And that is just so important on multiple levels for us. One is energy. That's probably one of the biggest ones, is our own energy and our own time. The less you have to preserve, the more time you have for other things. And so for me, that's a really, really important strategy. I love preserving food. I love canning. But I might love not canning even more. Like, I don't do it just because I love the work. There's other things that I would do as a hobby besides preserve food.
Well, and canning's great, but you do degrade the quality of the food in the process in almost every preservation way. So the more that you can eat raw, the more value you're
fresh, not
necessarily raw, but fresh. The more value you're getting out of the food you put into, as opposed to growing it, preserving it, and then consuming it later, because there's always degradation. So there's a better value there if we think about it that way. The other thing that you didn't mention was less energy as far as processing. Electricity, gas, propane, whatever you're using, we're using less of that when we're eating fresh.
Now, there is one other reason for doing this too, and you kind of touched on it lightly, is that you can spread out your harvest so that if you are preserving food, you're not just slammed with all of it right at the same time. So that can be really helpful to, spread out. Maybe you don't want to do tomatoes and turn cucumbers into pickles and do your green beans and all of it all in the same week or two, which can happen, especially if you have a short growing season. You have to get everything in at the beginning, and then you harvest it all right at the same time. That ends up being really stressful and a lot of heavy work all at once. So if you use some of these methods that we're going to talk about, you can extend that period so that you can do smaller batches of preserving throughout the season rather than all at one time.
So let's get into a few strategies, but we want to qualify that we're not really including structural intensive strategies.
Right.
You know, yes, you could buy a greenhouse, you could do a large hoop house. We have a small greenhouse here, and those are strategies, but we're not really covering them today. Those are extensive. They take a lot of cash outlay. We have had to learn over the years, working with what we have, how to come up with strategies that work. So those are valid, and we'd love to do some of those one day, but that's not what we're covering here because that's out of reach for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And we understand that, having had to live off of what we grow, but having limited resources at times to have advanced systems like a greenhouse and then putting heat into it or something like that. So we're not going to cover that, and we'll leave that out. But where do you want to start?
I think start by extending the planting out into the edges of the seasons.
Into the edges of the growing season. So a lot of people plant one time in the year, you know, sometime after your last frost.
Right.
And for us, that's June 1st about. And when we moved up here even, and we were planting a couple times a year, we had several people think we were kind of weird. They're like, well, what? Isn't there just one planting time?
I actually had somebody tell me straight out, I've never heard of anyone here in this area doing 2 plantings. We ended up doing like 4 or 5 different plantings, and that's what you can do.
Right.
Right.
So you don't have to just plant at one time, even the same crop, but maybe before we get into that, you have different crops that are going to do very well in early spring.
Yes.
You know, peas are one. Peas you can plant very, very early. Spinach, while it doesn't grow very fast, technically will germinate and sprout at about the soil at about 35 degrees.
Yeah. That's
and
really
it doesn't grow very fast. I've tried it, and it really isn't worth planting it that early. But it just gives you an example of, you have windows, you know, outside of your main crops of tomatoes and corn and beans that all need, you know, higher soil temperatures and higher ambient air temperatures that you can plant on one side of the season. I love being out here with the roosters. It's fun.
We have 2 roosters in the background, kind of
they're sparring with each other through the fence. One's in, one's out.
Right.
Anyway, so without getting into a whole lot of specific varieties, you can do a lot of things. A lot of your brassicas start earlier. You can grow cabbages, get them going earlier. A lot of lettuces. Now you can do the same thing on the fall side. There are a lot of things that will grow into the fall and even into winter, depending on your climate.
Right.
And of course, we can't cover every plant in every climate, but you can, like you were discussing, you had a story about harvesting chard when you were a girl.
Yeah. Well, if you live in milder climates, you may be able to grow some of these cool weather things straight through the winter.
Or a long way in.
Or a long way in with a little bit of season extension. And I know growing up, my mom would grow Swiss chard, and we would go harvest that out from underneath the snow. She would always put a little frost cloth on it, but we would go just pull that back, dig it out from under the snow, and we'd eat Swiss chard right through the winter, even in that area.
And I mean, kale's one that'll go even hardier. You can do that with some of your root crops. Your carrots get even better underground. And we're not going to go into every variety here because different varieties for different climates you're going to change, and so we'll give you some examples, but you need to do your research for where you're at and understand your growing season and different vegetables that might work for you. But the point is to extend that season, and where we have what most people here think is about a 3 to 4 month growing season, we can grow easily 6 to 8 months out of the year without any major infrastructure.
Right.
Just by those strategies, and that makes a huge difference.
It does make a huge difference. Now, there is another angle at this, which, you know, it's kind of the same topic, but it's a little bit of a different angle, is that a lot of varieties that won't grow in cold weather will still sit in your garden waiting to be harvested in cold weather. Right. So especially for your fall garden, things that you can do is to get greens, especially talking about those kales and even you know, the spinaches, some of those different things, some lettuces, up to full size before you start getting freezing weather. And as long as you protect it from having too much snow sitting directly on top of it, you can often go out and just harvest it and harvest it and harvest it, and it will just sit there and let you keep harvesting off of that same plant. Now, it's not going to grow. It's not going to get bigger. It's not going to put on more leaves, most likely, if your weather's cold enough, but it will be sitting there. So it's like long-term storage, you know, better than you could do in a refrigerator because it's still part of the plant and it's still there alive, but it's waiting for you to go harvest it. So that is another strategy, is to figure out what plants you can get in the ground and up to full size before a frost and before your freezing weather, so that you can harvest off of it throughout the non-growing season.
Right. So that's one major strategy. The other one that we really employ, really two major strategies, is staggering the plantings.
Yes.
And planting more densely early on and harvesting smaller fruits, so to speak. And then planting, throughout the season, different crops and harvesting them as you go, and then maybe eventually having a main harvest for preservation and whatnot.
Yeah.
So one example would be lettuces. Yeah, I've got at least one video out there on that. And instead of planting a bunch of lettuce and letting it get to large heads, we plant a lot of cut-all or upright type lettuces that we plant very densely in tight rows and trim and eat when they're babies, and kind of grow them as microgreens, but then let them grow up into near full size. And so out of the same planting, you can get multiple harvests.
Right. Yes. Another example of that would be beets. We do this with beets very often, that we plant a dense row of beets, and then instead of thinning, quite like you'd think of thinning when they're a seedling, we let them get up to baby beet size, and then we go and we pull every other or two, and then leave a third to leave the proper spacing. And we harvest those as baby beets that I'll pickle or we'll just eat fresh, and leave the alternating beets in there to grow to full size. So that way we're getting multiple harvests right out of that same planting.
And then the extension of that is there's that crop of beets that we've planted, and pretty much all those we're going to eat fresh throughout the season.
Right.
And you could even stagger the planting of those and stretch it out even more. We didn't. We just planted densely. I'm going to do what Carolyn says. But then we're planting a whole nother crop later. We're not going to actually plant these until July.
Right.
And they are purely for storage.
Yes.
And so that's our storage crop. So we've got our fresh eating crop and then our storage crop that will take us through the winter.
So planting the same thing multiple times throughout the season allows you to eat fresh during the summer, but then have a large crop in order to preserve for the winter at the end. And
depending on your growing climate, you can do this with just about anything. Corn's another example. We'd have a hard time with that with corn for ourselves because corn's a long season plant generally, and we don't have that long of a season, so it would be hard to do that. But if you've got a longer growing season, instead of having all your corn come in at once, which is a huge job, the years that we've grown a lot of corn, and then it all comes in at once, you get fresh eating for a week or so, and then you got to put it all up. However you're doing that, if you've got the right climate, you could plant corn every couple weeks and stagger that harvest so you've got fresh eating longer, and even break up the preservation of it if you're going to do that.
Absolutely.
And that's where you just have to look at the varieties you want to grow, what works in your climate, and what your growing season is. Those two things right there, those two strategies are huge for extending your season, and you're doing some more work, but you're not adding any additional infrastructure or major cost to your garden system.
Absolutely. So I think it's a really good strategy to realize that there are seeds that can go in the ground as soon as the ground is not frozen and it's not sopping wet.
Right.
So, whether they're peas or fava beans or different things like that, there are things that can go in very, very early. And there are things that can sit in the garden all the way through the winter and give you food on that side. But then there's things you can plant throughout the summer to have continual fresh eating and a continual harvest. So between those two things, you really got a lot of food.
I think we have a little bit of time. I want to add in one more that we didn't really talk about before getting here, but that is perennials. And, you'll hear this from us over and over and over again. If you want a sustainable sustainable system, you need to be planting perennials everywhere from fruit bushes to fruit trees to nuts, and to what made me think of it even is your cottage garden, where you're growing not just culinary herbs and medicinal herbs, but you're growing some foods like sorrels and good King Henrys that you can eat for leafy vegetables. And they're some of the earliest things up. They're going to get up and get going before we can plant any lettuces or spinach or anything like that. And so you really want to include the perennials. They're also just less work, and they're good for your overall ecology and system.
Well, and they're kind of your insurance program around the homestead, because a lot of times the years that you need to eat off the garden the most, because maybe you have personal challenges, maybe you have health issues, maybe you have financial issues, maybe life just gets crazy and you don't have time. Those are the years that it's the hardest to garden, because your life is going crazy. So you have those perennials, and they're just there waiting for you to harvest them for when you need them. So they're a really important part of the program, of the strategies.
Real good, guys. Well, I hope that helps you out and you can apply some of those. And it's never too late to start planting. Don't think, I mean, we're still pretty early in the season, even though a lot of parts of the country are well into garden season. It's really just kicking off for us, but it's never too late. We will be planting from now right on through to into August and maybe even the beginning of September. So if you're not gardening at all, it's not too late to get a start. And if you are, just add in a few of these things. Just do a little and play with it. Have fun. Don't.
In fact, next week, I think we're filming a very special video on how to do an instant garden.
Okay, we're getting ready to do that.
I think that's on the next week's schedule.
Instant garden, okay.
An instant garden. So we're going to show you, we are going to do an instant garden to show you how to do one. So you can look forward to that. If you don't have a garden in yet, this is something you can do right now or this summer to have a fall garden and some greens.
So prepare a spot. If you've got even just a 4 foot by 4 foot square or a 3 foot by 8 foot square, anything like that, if that's all you've got, get ready and to maybe plant some vegetables in it.
That's the how-to next week. But next week's Pantry Chat, we're actually going to be talking about raising meat chickens.
Yep, I know a lot of people are thinking about that this year, and people are still even ordering, and you may think it's past the season. A lot of people we know start them very early. We actually start them very late in the season. We have a reason for that, and we'll talk about it there. But it's if you're thinking about producing more food for yourself this year, as a lot of people are, it's not even too late to get started with the meat chickens.
Okay.
All right, guys. Have a great week. See you soon.
Goodbye.